mountains when I'm ocean waves.
Today on UVA Legends podcast, I have Steve Castellan. Steve is the answer to the trivia question, who was the center at UVA before Ralph Sampson? And unlike Ralph, who was a two-time player of the year in college basketball, Steve won the ACC championship at UVA. Steve, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So, well, so Steve, you're a name that I remember when I was a kid. I saw that team play. I was a 10-year-old watching that ACC championship game, but I hadn't heard much from you since you graduated, and then I saw your name on a Facebook group. I was glad to see it. So it's really good to see you're one of these guys that you were a contributor to a really special team, and then you kind of disappeared, at least for UVA basketball fans, for a few years.
Right. What's what happens when you don't have the internet?
Yeah.
My time after Virginia was, it was far off lands. And I didn't have access to so much what was going on here, and vice versa. Today, we all know where Ty Jerome is and Kyle Guy, and it's on the Twitter feeds and everywhere else, so it's easy to keep up.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. So maybe we shouldn't know where you were. Well, you can have a little privacy. Paparazzi following you around your whole life.
I don't think that was ever a problem for me.
So, well, tell us a little bit about where you grew up. I know you're from suburban Maryland. Is that
correct?
Cheverly, Maryland area?
That's correct. Cheverly is just outside the DC line in Prince George's County. Was there really most of my life. We had 1 year in Germany when I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was on sabbatical. We were in Göttingen, West Germany at the time. So that was a fond memory for me. But the rest of the time we were in Prince George's County nearby, and went to school there in DC for both elementary school and for high school.
Did you come from an athletic family?
Not particularly. My dad, my mom and my dad were both on the tall side. My dad was 6'2", my mom was 5'10", 5'11". But they themselves were not athletic in any way. I look at my uncles and my aunts, and I'm not aware of anything. But if you look at most of my cousins on both sides of the family, there are some athletes there. Some played in college. One guy was an alternate to the Olympics in '76.
Wow.
The other guys one guy was playing volleyball post college. Just a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. So there's some athleticism in the generation that I'm in with my siblings and cousins.
Yeah, it's not like nowadays where every kid is put into sports. So you find out who's athletic. Some kids probably maybe never were even exposed to it, and that can explain a lot. When did you start playing basketball?
The first team I was on, I was in 6th grade. Mm-hmm. As a young child, I was a swimmer before I was a basketball player. I was a good summer swimmer. I never did it year round, but I was enjoying it. So, but then when I got to 6th grade, they said, "Hey, we're going to have a basketball team. Let's try it." So it was fun. I wasn't particularly good, but it was fun.
And you were tall as a 6th grader?
Not extraordinarily tall. I was tallest one in my class, but not head and shoulders above people. I think I was one of those people that just kind of grew and continued to grow. I probably grew an inch and a half or so once I got to Charlottesville. So I was 19 when I stopped growing, but I was listed at 6'8" coming out of high school.
Yeah. Who was your first hero when you first started watching basketball? Who's the first person you remember being trying to play like?
I remember the Celtics from the late 60s. Mm-hmm. Bill Russell was playing for them. John Havlicek, Tommy Heinsohn, people like that. I also remember when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar came to he was Lou Alcindor at the time, but then changed when he first went to the Bucks, and he played for the Bucks with I think it was Oscar Robertson and Bobby Dandridge.
Yeah.
So those are the teams that I watch. I had posters of Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain in my room growing up.
Did you start getting more serious about your basketball? Did you start playing on better teams and getting some coaching?
I think the first time I got coaching was when I went to St Anselm's. The sixth grade, I went to St Anselm's in seventh grade. When I tried out for the eighth grade team as a seventh grader, I didn't make it. So I played, intramural stuff. And then ninth grade, I was an eighth grader. So, who else are they going to take? But when I got to eighth grade and ninth grade, Bob Dwyer, who was the coach, saw some potential in me, and he had me on the JV and the varsity on the bench as a freshman, and then sort of brought me along.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about St Anselm's. St Anselm's Abbey, I think is the
That's correct
name. It's a small Catholic school in Northeast DC. It is interesting because after we talked offline, it did come back to me. People that I know have gone there over the years. They do send quite a few of their kids to UVA. I mean, it's a small school.
Right.
What kind of kids go to St Anselm's? I know it's a very good academic school, but how did you find it, and what kind of kid would typically go to St Anselm's?
Well, how I found it was very much it wasn't particularly intentional. I went to a school called Campus School, which is related to Catholic University where my dad taught. And that was a school that was run by a convent of nuns associated with Catholic U. And when we got to sixth grade, pretty much all the guys in my sixth grade class were taking the entrance exam for what was then called the priory, which is a lesser form of an abbey, smaller. And I said, okay, why don't I do that? And it was sort of, I just wanted to be one of the crowd. They were all going to go there, and I had some friends there, and I wanted to maintain ties with them. So I did, and I got in, and my parents were a little bit surprised. They'd never heard of this place before, but through the ties at Campus School and some of the guys I was in school with then, I think 6 of us were in the first class there in seventh grade from that school at campus, and the seventh grade was 32. So it's roughly 20% of the class was from that school I came from. So that's how I got there. But it was very much, not lackadaisical, but serendipitous, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting place. They call grades, I think they call them forms, I believe. They teach ancient Greek there. I think the kids are required to take Latin. You take a theology class.
Oh, yeah. It's a classic education in the sense that in seventh grade, you start Latin.
Wow. And
I think at least when I was there, we were required to take at least 4 years of Latin.
Yeah.
I ended up taking 5, and you have French and German and other languages as well. And again, I think the curriculum now is much more diverse than it was when I was there. But it's very focused on college preparatory work and really preparing people for what goes on in the world, and hopefully to be critical thinkers.
Your parents must have been really impressed with you. Like, he signed up for this.
Well, my dad was an academic. He was a chemistry professor. He was at Catholic U for many years. Then he went to Maryland in the late 60s. And he wrote a textbook in physical chemistry. And that's part of what he did when we were in Germany for a year. But so there's a lot of interest in academics. And I had an uncle on my dad's side who was also an academic. And, education was a very important thing in the family. Yeah. So they were pleased. They said, okay, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, usually, you have to get in trouble to get sent to a place like that. And you actually, you signed up for it. Well, let's talk about Bob Dwyer a little bit. I think you mentioned to me that he was a big time coach, had a big reputation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him and how he ended up back at St Anselm's?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, and he was at St Anselm's for a little bit, and then he went to Carroll, which is a stone's throw from St Anselm's in Northeast. And Carroll is even closer to Catholic U than we were. But he was there in the mid-late 50s, and had some tremendous players, people that you know, and talk about John Thompson and Tom Hoover and George Leftwich, and Monk Malloy, who was later the president of Notre Dame. But they were nationally ranked at the time. And they did some traveling up and down the East Coast. But at one point they had between coach 58 and 60, they had 55-game win streak, which at the time was a record. I don't know if that record is still standing, but he would travel, and they were also, Archbishop Carroll was one of the first Catholic schools to be integrated in the early part of the 50s. Mm-hmm. And so obviously a lot of his players were African American, and they traveled to places where that wasn't necessarily the norm. But they took a lot of, I think, some criticism at the time, because that was before Brown v. Board of Education even. So they were, the bishop that set up the school and people who followed that path were sort of trailblazers in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I have some cousins who lived right near South Dakota and Riggs. I forgot what road they were on, but they weren't too far from where the campus is. And my grandmother lived on a huge project on 12th and New York Avenue. It was an enormous one. I know you've seen it before.
Right.
Those were tough neighborhoods back then. Not as tough as they'd get in the late 80s and early 90s when the crack epidemic hit. But definitely, right now, a lot of those houses are worth a lot of money. It's completely kind of turned over.
Right.
What was the neighborhood like when you went there, or surrounding St Anselm's?
It was great. I mean, I walked. I took a bus to school sometimes, and I would have to walk about 6 or 8 blocks to get from the bus stop to the school. Never any concerns or issues. It was I think a racially integrated neighborhood. A lot of the kids, some of the kids who came to school were walking from within blocks because they lived there. And even over where campus school was, really, no issues that I can recall. But again, when you talk about New York Avenue, that's a little bit further away. And as you go down, it was Bertie Bacchus was a school down towards, I forget the name of the road. But that, there were some challenges as you got closer to those areas.
Right. Yeah. Well, getting back to Coach Dwyer for a second, you hadn't had a lot of great coaching at the time. So did it occur to you right away that this is a very special coach?
Not right away. Because again, he had other things to worry about at the time, but he included me, and we were a small school. So it wasn't like, one, there were a lot of tall people, and two, there were a lot of people who were athletic. Now the class that was ahead of me was exceptional in terms they had, that when they were seniors, we had a very, very good team. And I was fortunate to be the 5th starter on that team with 4 seniors. But we were, at the end of the season, we were ranked in the top 20. Oh, wow. And one of the guys who was a senior went on to play at Jacksonville in scholarship. So he had quite a career down there. Again, he was a role player. He wasn't an All-American or anything, but he was a good player.
Yeah. So when did you take the next step? I guess you said you started your junior year. So did you work really hard in the off season? Did you go by yourself? Did you go to camps like 5-star? Did you play AAU? I don't think there was that many opportunities back then. But how were you able to improve? Being a tall guy is great, but you actually, obviously you had to get your skills in line.
I did. And one of the things that frustrated Coach Dwyer about me was I didn't play a lot in the summer. I was a swimmer. We had practice twice a day, and I swam, so I kept in shape, but I wasn't doing anything for basketball. After my junior year, he put me in the Jelliff League, which played down in Georgetown outdoors. And I had a good experience there. Gene Doan was the coach at Blair High School out in Montgomery County, Maryland. And Brian Mag was on the team. And there's a couple other guys who were on our team. And we competed down there. It was great because you had there were some guys, there was a team from the Bullets there, Chuck Robinson and
wow.
Not their first starters and whatnot, but some of the regular players were there playing in the league. So that was good. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was the year after. That was different. That was after graduation. But anyway, Jelliff League was good because it gave me a lot of competition, and he also got me up into Garfinkel's camp, the 5-star camp, and that was the first time I'd experienced that sort of competition. Because most of the teams we play were other small schools which didn't have great talent or great coaching, and we were always at an advantage there. But going up to 5-star. The buses came in from New York and wherever else, and you had these guys coming off who were my size or bigger, and they were just all, great players. And you had some of the college players. Bob Parrish was there, and he was still at Centenary. He's playing at Centenary, but I played against him a little bit up there, and kind of got an appreciation for what the gap was between where I was and where I needed to be.
By the end of that week, did you show improvement? The fact that you faced that kind of competition for the first time, and it's a pretty intense 6 to 8 hours a day on the courts. Did you improve during that week?
I think I did. I got at the end of the day, I think it was a 3+ or something. I didn't get certainly not a 5-star or 4, but I was a solid prospect, I think was the fair way to say it.
So did you start getting letters and did you start getting interest in schools at that point?
I did. The initial interest was from a lot of small schools. The first school that actually visited me at home was from William and Mary, and Bruce Parkhill, Barry's brother, was the coach at William and Mary. So he was the first coach in our house at home.
That's awesome.
But then after the 5-star camp, I started getting interest from other schools. Maryland was local. They really didn't get interested until about November when I started to play a little bit. At the time, we used to scrimmage St. Anthony's. And I'm trying to remember, maybe in my junior year, John Thompson was the coach at St. Anthony's before he went to Georgetown. Mm-hmm. So, we had some of his players in our gym and vice versa to compete in the preseason, sort of get ready for the year. But it wasn't until later in the fall I started to get some interest from the larger schools and from the ACC schools.
Well, your senior year, you mentioned your junior year, you guys got into the top 20. It sounded like you had a lot of seniors. How'd your senior year go? And what kind of player were you? I think you mentioned to me offline, you weren't really a post player. You're more of a 4, and you'd score around the lane.
I was a turn and shoot player. One of the criticisms of me was I couldn't put the ball on the ground. Well, at my size and in high school, if I put the ball on the ground, 3 people are going to fall down. And, I was running from, defense to offense, and people would step in front of me at half court. And if I wasn't paying attention, I knocked them down. That was called a charge. Yeah. I don't think they're allowed to do that anymore, but they did back then.
Yeah, I remember.
So I was catch it, turn and shoot, catch it, turn and shoot. It was very rare that I ever put the ball on the ground in high school because it would have been a disaster on several levels.
I call that efficient. I like players like that. I like the ball to move quickly and in the air. So did your senior year go well? Did your team play well?
We played well. We were 20-1 and lost that one game by 1 point. The big thing about the year was when it started out in November, we had a couple of new players on the team who had transferred in, and they were trying to get their shots, and I was scoring about 20, 25 points a game. And Coach Dwyer came in at one point. We were still in the preseason, and he said, boys, look over there. That's the franchise. Every time down the court, he's got to touch the ball. So what happened was, they, to their credit, they didn't push back on that, and they said, okay, if we're going to succeed, this is what we got to do. But my scoring went from 25 to 30, average of 38. Yeah. And there were a couple of 50-point games mixed in and 40s and everything else. So more than anything else, he was trying to showcase me as a prospect. We were not able to compete at the same level as the previous team the previous year, but by having a gaudy scoring average, that would attract attention.
Yeah. I mean, look, before the day of 3-pointers, that's the way basketball was. You really wanted your big men to touch the ball. I mean, that's how the game was played back then. And each team may have had one shooter or maybe 2, but the big man was supposed to touch the ball back in those days.
That was the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the idea. So you mentioned that Dwyer made you the focal point. What other kind of basketball and life lessons did you learn from Coach Dwyer?
Well, his approach to the game was very analytical, and he actually wrote a book on how to attack the zone defense. It was published back in the late 50s or 60s, but I've read parts of it, and it makes sense. And it's basic stuff. It's nothing, not rocket science, but he was very very calm in the way he approached the players, and he would be able to sit on the sidelines. And he would have his arms crossed on the sidelines, and things would be happening. And, he would say something, and amidst all the noise, you could hear him. I don't know how he did it, but he was, he got animated at times, but he was just very straightforward in how he did things. And again, we didn't do anything particularly complicated in terms of offensive sets or defensive sets or whatnot. But what we did is we became very disciplined in the way we did it. And we were able to succeed with that.
Yeah. So, I'm 9 years behind you. I'm from Robinson in Fairfax. I actually played for a guy that was probably a graduate assistant when you were playing, named Bob McKegg. That was my high school basketball coach. But what was it like going to high school during Watergate, the very late Vietnam years, and then the pullout? There was a lot going on in the early 70s. What was it like to be at St Anselm's during those turbulent times?
We had the good fortune to have some history teachers who were very interested in current events. So we spent a lot of time talking about not a little bit the war, but more certainly the Watergate situation. We would be talking that through and watching the hearings and whatnot. So some of the names associated with that are not unfamiliar to me. The war by that time I got there in '69. War was 72?
Yeah, about that.
In that neighborhood when it was dialing down.
Mm-hmm.
We were aware of it, certainly. And we had, when I first got there, there was very much a certain percentage of the students who were, they looked like they came out of the 60s in terms of, the hair and the jeans and the very, casual dress. We were required to wear coats and ties, but it didn't say you couldn't wear jeans with them. So we had a lot of coats and ties and jeans, but it made the point.
Exactly. Well, you end up choosing UVA and their coach, Terry Holland. You couldn't have chosen a better school for you. UVA had not had post players, because I remember Coach McKegg told me he had to play some in the post, and he was only 6'5". He was 2 years in front of you. But UVA hadn't had a lot of post players in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. And so you and a guy from Richmond named Otis Fulton got a chance to play a lot. So why did you end up choosing UVA? And it was a great decision.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The schools that were interested in me were Virginia Tech, Maryland, Duke, Carolina, and Virginia. Now, Maryland was very close to home, and perhaps too close to home in terms of my dad taught there. And, I just, when they took me on my visit to Maryland, they took me to a shopping mall and I ran into half a dozen of my friends from the pool. It was very close to home. And I was looking to step away a little bit. At Carolina, two things. They did not have an engineering program per se, but they were proposing a 3-2 program with Duke, where I do my engineering classes at Duke and get a math degree at Carolina. And after 5 years, I would have 2 degrees. And at that point in my life, the idea of spending more than I had 4 years in college was not appealing. But they also told me that it'd be 3 years before I saw any time on the court. And that was being honest, because obviously Carolina was a very good team, and I was a bench player in their system, which is true. Duke at the time was they had a new coach, Bill Foster, was there. They recruited me probably as hard as Virginia did. This is before Mike Jaminski was there. Jim Spinarco was the same class as I was. He had already committed. Ironically, I felt that Duke was lower in the world than Virginia was from potential, and so I went to Virginia. Now, they made me no promises about playing time, but the people were great. The setting was great. Mike Schuler was one who spent most time with recruiting me. He passed away recently this past year.
Yeah, I saw that.
But he was the one who. And then when I went down, I had to visit and met Terry and Ann and all the guys. They took me to Pavilion 11 on my trip down there, and they studied, for a physics test while they were playing cards and drinking beer. So I said, "This is where I want to go."
Exactly. Yeah. So when you went down there, what are your memories of first seeing the campus as a student, and what kind of memories are those?
It's an impressive place architecturally. It's a beautiful campus, and you get to walk around in that setting that's been around for 200 years or thereabouts. you get it when you're walking around and you're listening and you're being quiet. There's a sense of awe that overtakes you when you look at the buildings and think about the people who built them, but also the people who inhabited them in terms of students and professors and former presidents, with Jefferson and whatnot. It just was an awe-inspiring experience, and the idea that you got to live there and walk around and go to class there and be part of that is just it was always been impressive to me.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure coming from St Anselm's pretty intense program, it was probably a relatively smooth transition academically.
Pretty much, I had some. I did not do well in chemistry, which disappointed my dad to no end. But other than that, I did reasonably well as a student. I was able to graduate in 4 years with only one summer school to kind of try to get ahead. I was not a Phi Beta Kappa by any stretch, but I was able to get through and do the work.
You have to do like the 17-hour e-school, like the first semester, like everybody else.
Yeah, and you had labs too, which complicated practice schedule. But the coaches were good with it, and we just worked it through. But the other thing is the schedule itself back then was much more predictable than it is today. Mm-hmm. We played on Wednesday. We played conference games once you got to January on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And one year you're home on Wednesdays and you travel on Saturdays. The next year you flip it. You travel on Wednesdays and you're home on Saturdays. Mm-hmm. And there was very little interruption. You didn't play on Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sunday. It didn't happen. So you were able to plan and work that out probably more easily than you could today.
Yeah. Did you have dinner at Ken Johnson's a lot?
Not the first year. The first year we were at Newcomb Hall.
Okay.
And this was its second year, maybe a second or third year. They started the Ken Johnson's, as a training table.
Yeah.
But actually I worked there after my first year. I worked one night a week washing dishes at Ken Johnson's.
Is that right?
So that I could get 4 meals for free during the week.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
what were your first impressions of Terry Holland as a coach? And, when you think about your 4 years you spent with him, what is he like to play for? And what kind of things did you learn from Terry Holland?
I mean, you start with a person. He's a great individual. It's somebody I felt I could trust. And I think he was interested in his players individually, and then corporately as a team. There were times he got angry with us and he let us know, but it didn't take away from the relationship. When we were not doing what we're supposed to do, he let us know, whether it's in practice or on during a game. But there's always the very quiet confidence to keep pushing and to look at what's possible. And the first year was a great example of that, because we were sort of a little bit of a ragtag bunch compared to the Dukes, not the Dukes, but the Carolinas and Marylands and NC States of the world at that time. But we were playing hard, we were playing well, 100% man defense every game first year. And we just played physically. In the lane, you people come in the lane and they get banged around. And as we got close to the tournament, you had the sense that we were playing well enough playing all these teams very close, playing the Marylands and the Carolinas. We lost to Carolina, I think, on a tip-in at their place towards the end of the year. And then we went to the tournament, and he kept saying, we can do this. And those are the only 3 teams that year that we had not had beaten at least once. All the other teams we had beaten at least once. But those 3 teams we had not. But then we get to the tournament in order: State, Maryland, and Carolina. And all of a sudden we win the tournament.
Wow. Was it a big adjustment playing in the ACC? You came from a very small school, like that. There wasn't the AAU of today, where a big player like yourself would have been playing, every week of the year at a tournament somewhere that you're not with your actual team. So were you able to adjust? Was it a big learning curve?
There was a lot to learn, and practice obviously was very helpful. And you had people like, Otis had come from a big school in Richmond, and they'd been very successful. Iavaroni had already a year under his belt. Wally was 4th year. So playing against these guys, you get banged around, and you get the feel for what the standards are and where you have to get to be able to play and contribute. So I was, for a good part of the year, I was the sixth man for big guys. If Otis came out, I went in. If Marc or went out, I came in. Maybe Wally, but usually Marc. But that's where I got my minutes.
Well, you seem to play behind Otis your first year, but then your other 3 years, he seemed to come in for you. Is that because you had more of a learning curve? He was from a big school in Richmond, and he was probably more prepared for the college level. And or I know he'd gotten hurt his second year as well. I think he'd broken his jaw. But talk about your relationship with Otis and why did it flip like that?
Well, Otis and I were roommates first year.
That's right. Yeah.
And when we were on campus, we were known as the bookends because we were always doing things together. And I remember once we were trying to get down to practice, and you weren't allowed to have a car first semester. And so we're hitchhiking on, was it Alderman Road, going down towards U-Haul. And this woman in a Carmen Ghia comes by, and she says, "I'll give you a ride if you both get in the back seat." And we did. We had to fold up. We were more flexible back then.
Exactly.
But we have a good relationship. And I talked to Otis the other day. What happened in the first year, he again, based on his experience, he was a better player for what we needed that first year. And you're right. In the second year, he started. I was coming off the bench beginning of second year. But in that early tournament, he hurt his knee. And it took a while for him to come back from that. And so with him out, I had to slip into the center role. And then again, I think the knee hampered him for a while. He maybe didn't get back to 100% that year. But at that point I was, continuing to improve, and I had some of my better games second year. It was kind of an interesting year in a lot of levels. Obviously we didn't have a winning record, but it seemed like the year everybody got hurt. Otis got hurt. I got hurt. Everybody was getting hurt, and we never quite got healthy until we got to tournament time. Yeah. And then we made another run at Carolina.
Well, what about Iavaroni? Iavaroni is known as a character that can get under people's skin a little bit. He can bang you. I know he even got Dean Smith upset in one of the tournament games. What was Iavaroni like in practice? Would he bang you a little bit?
Oh yeah. But Marc is very intense, very physical, and he's like a lot of players. He's not an all-American player, but he's a journeyman player. He knows what he has to do. He plays defense. He sets the picks. He gets rebounds. He does all those things. When he was playing with Philadelphia in the early '80s, the team, when they won the championship, he actually started for them. Yeah. Bobby Jones was coming off the bench, but Marc was playing that role, and he was good at it, and they had great success that year. So Marc was one of the people that I worked with not only during the year but in the off season. He was one of the people that lifted weights with us, and we'd play down at the Dell and in other places. So we were competing against each other a lot during those years.
Some say that Philadelphia team was one of the best teams in the history of the game, with Moses Malone and Julius Erving, Andrew Toney, and Jakes. What about Wally Walker? Now Wally was in his fourth year. He had an injury plague a couple of years. He was always a great shooter, good scorer, really good player. But he finally got healthy his fourth year. What was he like as a teammate? Were you guys in awe of him, or was he just one of the guys?
I don't think we were in awe of him. I mean, he was a great teammate. And again, he's looking for everybody to do their job and to work. And he was not he was the leading scorer, but he wasn't a selfish player. He was doing everything he did within the context of the offense. And we, last thing I was doing at that point was looking to shoot, unless I was open. But you run the offense, you're looking for opportunities, and it all worked together very well. Right.
How about Billy Langlow? He was another local product. He was from DeMatha. Very, very scrappy player. His game was very interesting. He had his own game. Did you know Billy from home, and what was he like to play with in college?
I did not. Again, we were a Catholic school. DeMatha was a Catholic school, but they were in an entire different universe in terms of who they played. Yeah. Obviously, DeMatha is a great school, long history with Morgan Wooten and all those folks. We were, probably the smallest school of any Catholic or otherwise in DC in terms of enrollment. The average class size was between 20 and 30. In my senior year, I had 17 in my senior class. So it was a very, very small school. So I did not know Billy. I knew of Billy. I knew of Dave Kesters. I'd read about them in the papers. But again, good teammates. Everybody was working hard, having a good time when we're done, but working hard on the court and in practice.
Well, you came to UVA with one of my good buddies, a guy I played adult men's leagues with in Charlottesville named Bobby Stokes.
Yes.
Dr. Bobby Stokes. Now,
that's correct.
What was Bobby like?
He was quiet. He was very quiet. We were in the same dorm in Tuttle. They were, I think, the next suite down from us. But again, he had his head down. He did the work. He was coming from a smaller school as well. But he wasn't awed by it. And you talk about unselfish. There's nobody less selfish than Bobby Stokes in terms of the way he played. His whole role was to handle the ball, play the defense. I think Bobby perhaps gave Phil Ford the most challenging time in the four corners than anybody else, because we were able to come back and get close with them. Never quite turned the corner until the tournament, but when we played them, they go four corners. Bobby was on Phil Ford.
Yeah. Before we get to that tournament again, I want to get to that historic tournament at the Capitol Center. By the time you had gotten there, I think the first class of women had just graduated, or maybe it had been a year, and then African Americans had finally en masse. I don't know about en masse, but lots of African Americans have started to come to the University of Virginia. What was the social life like in your eyes at UVA at the time?
Well, you have to keep something in mind. My high school is all boys, right? So, other than the summer in the swimming pool, I didn't have a lot of interaction with women. So it was great.
Yeah.
But I think the way we were set up in the dorms, we had the 3 floors. You had the first 2 floors were, I think, all guys, and third floor was women. So 1/3 of the dorm was women. And I still am in touch with a lot of had a great relationship with the people I met first year, and maintain that even till this point. Still see them during, at the reunions and other times as well. But those are some very valuable relationships to me, very meaningful.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the 1976 ACC tournament. UVA had never won an ACC tournament before. As a matter of fact, in football and basketball, I think it's fair to say we were not a sports powerhouse by any means at that point in either football or basketball. But you guys, I think we've been 5-9. Our record in the ACC for the last 2 or 3 years in a row. And we play NC State. NC State is a team we hadn't beaten in I think several years at least.
Right.
And, I believe they still had David Thompson, Monty Towell.
No. What, in 75?
They'd already graduated?
They did. They did.
Yeah. That was a Hawkeye Whitney, or was he there? But anyway, tell us about the NC State game. I know they were rated in the top 20, and that was our first game, and we upset them.
Yes. And again, State, they had beaten us twice at our place close. But what I remember about that game is we had 30 points before they had 10.
Wow.
Wally came out and was lighting it up. And the defense was good. And we just, from the get-go, we were just very intense. So that game, I think, ended up being a 10 or 12 point game when all was said and done. But we got off to a great start in the beginning of the game and just kept going. But I remember I was at Kenny Carr and Phil Spence inside, and Glenn Sudhop was a freshman at the time. I'm trying to remember Clyde.
Oh, was it Clyde Austin?
Clyde Austin might have been there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So you beat. Do you think it was an advantage to be in Maryland for that game? I mean, here's the Capitol Center, and you played there at least once. I know you were in the Capitol Classic All-Star game, but the ACC tournament had always been in North Carolina, and they moved it, and they started rotating it occasionally to other parts of the ACC area.
Right.
You think that was an advantage to play the game at the Capitol Center, and was it an advantage to you?
I think it was an advantage to anybody who wasn't from Tobacco Road,
Yeah.
simply to get out of that setting in Greensboro where it just felt like, you had to do that. You had to do whatever they did and then some to get the calls and to get the sense. And they're so close. It's basically a home game for Duke Carolina State and Wake if they're in the tournament, and they have all the history there. But that sort of broke the paradigm and then opened the door for other sites to take it, and they have all over the place now. As far as me personally, I'd been to the Capitol Center for more concerts than I had basketball games. But at the game at the Capitol Center when I was there. I played a couple minutes. It wasn't very much, but no particular advantage for me personally. Obviously, my family was close. So when I think we got 2 tickets. So my parents came and then rotated with my siblings to get them into some of the games.
Yeah. Well, next up is University of Maryland, Coach Lefty Drizel, John Lucas, Mo Howard. I think Tom McMillan may have still been there, he graduated.
Yeah.
But a great team, also nationally rated.
Yeah.
Going into that game, did you guys think we had a chance to beat Maryland?
Yes.
Yeah.
We believe we had a chance to beat anybody,
Right.
because we came within a whisker of beating Carolina at their place.
Right.
Again, we played them tough in the games we played them, and we said if we do the things we want to do and play well and get a couple calls, we can make this happen. But they had Tom Roy and I think Owen Brown inside, and Brad Davis was the third guard. They were still doing the 3-guard offense.
Yeah.
But what was the other thing I was thinking?
I believe Bobby Stokes came up big in that game. I think he got a steal.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he hit some free throws.
He hit some free throws too. Yeah.
Near the end of the game, that sort of set the margin and got us close. I think it ended up being a 6 or 8 point win.
Right.
But the funny part, as I said, my dad taught at Maryland, and he would go into the Rexall drugstore across the street from Maryland to get a newspaper or something. And he started, all of a sudden, Lefty Drizel started showing up and say, "Hey, Dr. Castellan, let me take you to lunch." And my dad was very intent on staying out of that mix.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be partial. He didn't want to get, but he didn't want to feel like he was beholden to anybody because they did something for him. So he just ran away from that and stayed clear. But when we got to the tournament, my dad was sitting down there, and some of his colleagues from Maryland were sitting across the aisle in the Maryland section. So it got very interesting in terms of who was rooting for who.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Oh man. Well, it's when you guys are probably not used to playing 3 games in 1 week. You were saying before that your schedule was very regimented.
Correct.
And we never had a lot of success in the ACC tournament. All of a sudden, we're playing a 3rd game in 3 nights, and we're playing North Carolina. I believe had at least 5 future NBA players. Walter Davis, and
Right.
Phil Ford, I believe Tom Lagarde.
Yes, and
so
Mitch Kupchak.
Mitch Kupchak as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they had another guard. I can't think of his name. A good shooter, but
John Kuster.
John Kuster. That's it.
Yeah.
So it was a great team, and it was a very close game. I think down the stretch we had a couple travels, couple calls went our way. But what are your memories of playing UNC in the final?
When we started out at halftime, there was a play with Otis where I think it was Billy Langlow threw him a pass from out of bounds at half court. Otis caught it in the mid post, turned and shot it and went in. And I think that put us up 5. And we're saying, okay, we can do this. This is gonna happen. We come out, and one of the things Coach Holland always said at the beginning of the second half, first 5 minutes are very important. What happens in the first 5 minutes is going to establish how the rest of the game goes. And I think Carolina came back and it tied it up, and then we were kind of going back and forth with the score, and I think they got to within a couple minutes to go, and it was tied, and they started holding it, and then I've seen some of the replays. I don't remember all the details, but I remember there was a call against John Kuster with a walk.
Yeah.
And then I think Walter Davis lost the ball out of bounds on a drive on the baseline. Iavaroni was, bellying up, and he just went out of bounds and lost it. So at that point, they fouled us. Langlo hit some free throws. You know, all good stuff. All good stuff.
Well, was that one of the greatest moments of your life? I mean, the crowds on the court, they're picking Wally Walker up, and you must have been, over the moon with a big win like that.
I think in terms of an experience, not only the basketball part, but the part afterwards and the part around it. That's something that's unique in all my time in basketball in terms of winning a championship like that. And again, a team that we were, I think, second to last in the conference. So expectations for us from people outside the program were very low. But we had this quiet confidence, and the coaches were doing a great job of continuing to push us and to demonstrate they believed in us. And it just, let the players play and you see what happens. So we were able to do some of the things we were trying to do all year, do it consistently over the course of 3 games, and this is what happens. Yeah. And I think, so. But again, in terms of personal experiences, it's wonderful. There's stories about back at the hotel. They torn down the hotel we stayed at. It was up towards the airport and towards Baltimore. But I remember Jimmy Graves was there with his gear, and they were cooking steaks out, and talk about a steak sandwich. These were, there's nothing parallel to that. But there were people up on the roof of the hotel.
That's crazy.
It's just.
Well, now you're in the NCAA tournament, which is something that doesn't happen every day at UVA, especially back then. And we played DePaul with future Bullet, Dave Corzine.
Right.
Was it a little bit anticlimactic, winning the ACC tournament, getting that week off and going on the road and playing in the NCAA tournament?
Not sure anticlimactic. It was the energy and the emotion of what happened in Landover. It was certainly a high that we were feeling for a while and probably continued to feel into that game. But, end of the day, we went down there, and it wasn't March Madness the way they have today. There wasn't all the pump and all the media the way, you're in the people putting odds on every different team. Many fewer teams, of course. We prepared to Paul the way we didn't prepare for any other team. You had a scouting report. You learned the players. You learned what they like to do. I think ended up losing by about 9 or 10 points, if I remember right.
Yeah.
I don't remember playing particularly well that game, but they had some good players, and we weren't up to that at the point.
Yeah. Well, the next year, I think you had one of your best years personally in terms of scoring average. It seemed like you really, by that point, had adjusted to life in the ACC and in college basketball. I think you mentioned earlier that there were some injuries.
Right.
Bobby described that year as the bad news bears. Like one of those things, everything that could go wrong did go wrong for a while.
Yep.
But you made another tournament run and got to the final. Tell us a little bit about your second year.
The 2 things I remember about that is, the injuries certainly was with us for most of the year. And the first year, I said, every single game we played man-to-man defense, every single game. And we did the same thing in my second year until we had a game down at Tulane in New Orleans. And I think we were missing at least 2 players. And we were going to stop on the way back from New Orleans at NC State for a Saturday game. And guess what? We're going to play zone. And that was the first time in my recollection that we had played zone in my time at Virginia. So that was a momentous thing for me, because, we just played a man-to-man. That's what you do. The other thing was the tournament run, because we had gotten as healthy as we had been all year by the time the tournament came around. And even right before the tournament, there was an incident in practice where Marc's elbow hit Otis's front tooth, and Marc got a cut right on the elbow where it bends, right? And so they had to sew him up. And in the Wake Forest game, when Marc hit the winning shot, people are trying to go around and, hug him and whatnot. And he's holding his arm up so his elbow doesn't get hurt.
Yeah.
And then the second game we played Clemson. And for some reason, those first 2 years, we played pretty well against Clemson and against Tree Rollins. So that ended up being about a 10 or 12 point win. And then we head into the Carolina game, and same thing. Carolina had won the regular season. They didn't have to play the first game, so they'd only played one game. We played two, and we got probably within 5 or 6 minutes of the end of the game, we're up 6. And I think, as Coach Holland put it very aptly, ran out of gas.
Yeah.
We weren't able to, and again, they were probably the more talented team, but because we were doing what we were able to do, we were able to get that advantage and keep working it. But at the end, we just couldn't get over the line.
Well, from your perspective, it had to be an awesome season. You had a good personal season. You got to the ACC final again after rather turbulent regular season.
Right.
Your third year, you're going to play with two great players that I grew up just loving to watch the way they played. They were teammates from Louisville,
Right.
Lee Raker
Right.
and Jeff Lamp. What did you think about those guys when you met them, and what kind of teammates were they?
It's interesting. My first impression of them was formed before I ever met them. I was down working out in the spring, the second year after the season was over, and we had already signed Lee Raker and I think Jeff Klein. And Coach Page came down, and he had this sort of glazed look in his eye, like just looking just like he was stunned. And he said, "We signed Jeff Lamp." And it was a surprise because I don't think Jeff got interested in Virginia until after Lee had signed. But Coach Page was surprised by it and pleased, obviously, but that was sort of a sea change in terms of the players we were able to get in. They were always getting good players, but Jeff was sort of a notch above that, and he demonstrated that throughout his career. So, in terms of it changed a little bit the style we played. We got more, they were playing man and zone on defense, a lot more outside shooting because all of a sudden we had some guys who could shoot from the outside more consistently. And certainly Wally could do that, but we did that in the context of very disciplined half-court offense. They changed the offense into, I'm trying to remember, it's called the flow, a more free-form offense that gave more flexibility to the players on the perimeter. But again, I think the results speak for themselves.
Yeah. Well, you guys get to the NIT in your third year, so it's 3 tournament bids in a row for you, and you play Georgetown, and Georgetown had come from nowhere, and in 5 or 6 short years, John Thompson was building that program into something that was going to be very special.
Right.
We end up playing him in an overtime game. Right. Where was that game, and what do you recall about that game?
It was played in Charlottesville. I remember the overtime. I think I think at the end it might have been 2-point game. They won, obviously. But there's a guy who played center. I think Tom Skates was a center for Georgetown, and I think it was a 20-point game for me, if I remember right. Wow. It was a good game, but we came up short. Other than that, I don't remember many of the details beyond that. But I remember talking to Coach Thompson after the game and congratulating him, and vice versa. He was aware of me because he'd seen me back when he was coaching at St. Anthony's. But Coach Dwyer had made some statements in the press about me, and I think part of that, Coach Thompson took exception to some of the comments, but he sort of was very complimentary to me after that game. So,
why would Coach Thompson take exception to comments that your own coach made about you?
Coach Dwyer had coached many great players at Carroll. Thompson was one of them.
I see. Yeah.
He made a comment my senior year that I was the best player to ever played for him.
I got it.
Now, I didn't think much of it at the time, But in retrospect, I realized when Coach Dwyer wasn't coaching basketball, he was selling insurance. He's a salesman.
Yeah.
So I was the product of the day, and he was selling me, and he did a very good job. And I, would not have had the success I did without him. But I think Coach Thompson saw that I was a capable player, not that I was the best that had ever played for Coach Dwyer, but that I wasn't just an illusion. So that was satisfying to a certain degree.
Did you have any idea, or could you have known the success that was going to come to John Thompson? I mean, could you see how special he was and how special the program was going to be?
Well, he'd made a lot of progress in a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
obviously they won national championship. At least was it once or twice?
I think just once. I think in 84.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was still early days, because at the first couple of years, most of his recruits were coming pretty much out of the area that he knew,
Mhm.
out of St. Anthony's, out of Carroll. Al Dutch went there. Al was the same year I was. So Georgetown, the first couple of years, was like that. Tom Skates was a St. Anthony's product. But I think as he continued to have success and was able to reach out his recruiting area, then you really started to take off. And they were they in the Big East at the time? I think early 80s when the Big East came about.
Yeah, I think they went to the Big East like 78, 79. I think they're probably ACAC South or something like that at the time, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, your fourth year. One thing that was happening now is, you've acclimated to the ACC. You're a better player, but the team is getting better and better and getting better players every year.
Right.
By your fourth year, we get Jeff Jones, who's going to be a great coach for many years at different programs.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your fourth year, about Jeff Jones and what happened your fourth year at UVA.
The fourth year, I'm trying to think. That was the year we got some recognition in the polls early on.
Yeah. We had a real good away win against like Duquesne, or maybe it was Temple. We had a big win against Temple away. They were rated in the top 20.
Old Dominion, maybe.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah. We played, if I remember right, we played a game at Old Dominion in December, and we ended up winning by 15 or 20 points, which was a good thing. And I came back and had to do an engineering product that Saturday night after getting off the bus coming from Norfolk. But at that point, I think we got ranked number 8. We got up to number 8 in December. Then we got into the January, had a couple tough games in conference. But I think by the time we got towards the end of the season, we were third. I want to say third in the conference. Don't remember the details. But we ended up having an early out in the ACC tournament and then going to the NIT again, and won the first game, and then went on to play Alabama Birmingham and lost down at their place, I think by 2, 90 to 88. They had a big guy he had a house in the low post. Great player.
I forgot his name. Yeah.
His nickname was the Mule.
Yeah. Reggie,
we understood.
Was it Reggie? Reggie something? Yeah.
Maybe.
I can't pull it. Yeah, I know you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, well, your career is over. Your UVA career is over. So what did you do next? Did you? I know you played a little bit overseas. Tell us about what happened next.
Well, the summer before, I had played for a team called News Release. You're familiar with Athletes in Action?
Sure.
News Release is that variety of team.
Mm-hmm.
And Coach Schmidt got me connected with that. So I spent about 6 or 8 weeks playing in Europe with this team. And we played in England, Italy, and Poland. And I had some good experience, some good exposure. When we played in Italy, we played in a couple tournaments there. I played well, and I'm playing with other guys from all over the country, about 12 or 13 players. But we were playing Italian professional teams. So it was fun. We're playing outdoors, under the lights, in a. Oftentimes you're playing on asphalt, and you're at a city square, and they just set up the basketball thing on this city square where they have the market during the week. I had a great time there, and had a couple of Italian journalists talk to me about what I thought of playing in Italy, because I talked to some of the Americans who were playing on those teams, and that was an interesting learning for me that opportunity existed. So when I came back and went through my fourth year, in my head I said, maybe that's an option for me, because the NBA wasn't an obvious option. I ended up getting drafted by the Celtics, and when I tell people that, they say, whoa, that's pretty good. And I said, well, you have to remember, back then they had 10 rounds. I got drafted in the 7th round. Today they have 2 rounds. So it's a different world. But I went to rookie camp, rookie and free agent camp, was invited to veteran camp, was there for probably not quite a week. Had a chance, and obviously Larry Bird was a rookie, so I was playing against him, which was another interesting experience, humbling experience. But when I was up there, Tommy Heinsohn was up there, and he saw me play. He was somehow connected with a team in Italy. So he made an offer to my agents that, why don't you have Steve come over and play in Italy for a while? Kind of get his feet under him. And so before I knew it, it was a Friday. I got a call from my agent Friday morning, and they said, pack your bags, you're going to go to Italy Sunday night. I said, excuse me? And I said, we've got a deal in place for you to go to Italy. And the difference was the Celtics had made me basically a minimum wage offer. And at the time, minimum in the NBA was $25,000. And, it's different now. But, the thing with Italy was, it was a little bit more, not a lot, but a little bit more, but it was guaranteed. The Celtics, it was 25 grand, but you had to be with the team. They would prorate it. You had to be with the team for 50 days after the beginning of the season to be guaranteed the full year. So you're very much in as the 7th round pick, and Larry Bird's the first guy, and we know how that's going to turn out. And there was another guy who had played in Italy who was playing the same position, and the coaches told me that if it was a toss-up between me and him, they'd go with him because he had more experience. So they said, go to Italy, get some experience, come back and try again. So I went to Italy, and Tommy Heinsohn was we flew over that Sunday night.
Oh. So what was that experience like? Did you enjoy playing there, and how long did you stay?
I was in Italy for 1 season. I got over there in September, came back in late April. Mm-hmm. It was interesting. They picked us up at the airport, and we drove over. The team was playing in a tournament in Brescia, and Brescia was where Marc Iavaroni was playing. So the first day in Italy, I ran into Iavaroni. Now, I didn't play in the first game because I was in no shit condition to play after a flight, but I played the next night. But it was fun. It was a learning experience in a lot of ways. You have to learn the nature of how meals are put together over there. Mm-hmm. I was at the pregame meal, and they bring out this large bowl of pasta, and I love spaghetti. Yeah. So I'm eating it, and all the guys have taken a portion, and they've eaten, and they've stopped. And I'm eating it, and it's great, and the sauces are great. And I'm eating it, and I'm eating it, and they're looking at me and kind of snickering and shaking their heads. And what I didn't realize, that was the first plate. You have a little bit of pasta, and then the main dish comes later. So you learn.
Did you run into Rod Griffith over there? He was a Wake Forest.
Right, I remember Rod.
Yeah, he was a Wake Forest, one of my favorite players when I was a kid. And I know he had a long career in Italy. Did you happen to run into him while you were over there?
I don't remember, but there's a couple different levels.
Right.
In A1, you're allowed 2 foreigners. In A2, you're allowed 1 foreigner. I was in A1 that year. I don't remember Rod. I remember some other players. Remember Joe Pace?
Yeah, he played for the Bullets.
Joe Pace was over there. Jim McMillan, who had played with the Knicks and I think a little bit with the Bucks, was over there.
The Cavaliers too.
Right. There's a guy who was in the ABA. His name escapes me right now, but he was over there. There was Mike D'Antoni.
Oh, yeah.
Mike D'Antoni was in the same city I was in.
Right.
So I would run into him occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were some others, but again, the names are escaping me right now.
Well, what about UVA basketball? So after you left, the program changed because Ralph Sampson came.
Yep.
And, did you keep up those? What did you think about those 4 years? It was an incredible run. And have you kept up with UVA basketball through the years? And are you a big Tony Bennett fan?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I followed the team in general, long distance, and I'd get the scores. I wouldn't get a lot of the details that you'd get in a local story. I came back after the year in Italy. I had 2 years in France, and then had to retire. I had an eye injury that required surgery. And the doctor said, you should not do that anymore. So I retired. But I was able to see Ralph's 4th year. So I was sitting on the edge of the couch when they lost NC State in the regional final.
Yeah.
So close. But I followed, throughout, and I had brought my son up to some of the games when he was young, and he was at the Graves camp it'd probably be the early 90s. The basketball camp at Graves Mountain Lodge. But Tony's arrival, and when Jeff was coaching, obviously, because I played with him, a lot of keen interest there. With the other coaches that came along afterwards, I followed the team. They had some up and down seasons, so that was challenging for them. When Tony came and I saw the way they played and the way he was setting up a program. He wasn't just setting up a season, he was setting up a program, and the basis of that program is fundamentally the same year to year to year. And I couldn't be more impressed. And to watch, even when they would lose games, you felt pride in the way they played, the way they comported themselves, the way they handled it, the way they reacted to it. And no better example than the situation in 2018 with UMBC, and then what happened in 2019. You can't write that stuff. It just can't get any better.
Yeah.
So all the respect in the world for what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yeah, he was like the perfect hire. So, well, Steve, this has been great. It's so nice to meet you and to do this. Well, why don't we just tell us what you've been up to the last 40 years? Are you still an engineer? And share with us what you would like.
Well, I've been in a number of different situations. To say I'm an engineer, I've utilized my engineering education. How about that?
Uh-huh.
I've been in facilities or I've been in manufacturing or construction in one way or another throughout my career. I started out in the shipyard building submarines and aircraft carriers. I was there for 6 years.
Wow.
Then I went into concrete construction for a couple of years in Norfolk. Then moved over to automotive headlights, injection molding of plastics for headlights and taillights for Chrysler. Then I moved up to Philadelphia, working for a company that was owned by Coors.
Okay.
So I've been able to spend some time at the Coors Brewery out in Golden, Colorado.
Yeah.
But we made flexible packaging for Kodak, and also Ralston Purina, and now Nestle Purina, and a lot of other different things. Then that plant was acquired by a European company called Huhtamaki. Mm-hmm. And they invested a lot in the plant, and that was part of my job, was to upgrade equipment, replace equipment, do building rearrangements based on what the new lines had to look like, and then to maintain it all and manage all the environmental impacts of that. So I'm still doing that in a different setting. I'm working for a company now that does food packaging, but we do it out of paperboard, not plastics.
Wow.
So the themes of project management and engineering technology are constant throughout all that.
Yeah.
But the projects are what I really enjoy and get a kick out of.
Well, that's awesome. Well, look, Steve, this is great. I really appreciate you taking time on a night where the Phillies are clinching a berth in the World Series. I know it was a big night for you. Congratulations, but thanks for doing this. And man, it's been great meeting you and hearing your story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation, and good to spend time with you as well.